and hopefully others on YouTube Live, which is great. So thank you very much. I am going to share my screen, and so give me a minute here. All right. My presentation, Find the Warrior Within Yourself today. Zoom etiquette, I know Cole talked about it a little bit, but just to remind everybody, if you have any issues on Zoom anyway, the chat feature is in the bottom. Please mute yourself. You're welcome to show your video so I can see you. And if you have any questions prior to that, put in the chat box at the end. We'll see how Q&A goes on the Zoom, and I know Cole is going to manage that through the YouTube Live. And it'll be pretty easy for Zoom, if you want to raise your hand through that feature, great. If not, I'm sure Cole is going to be able to moderate. My presentation is going to be about 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So here we go. So first, here you are, all of you mainly high schoolers, I would assume, for JEC members, or you're soon to be entering college. So you may be wondering, how can this woman who's in her 50s in front of you share with you some knowledge that you can relate to? And so I want to assure you that I can. I have 3 teenage daughters. Well, one is now 20, so 20, 18, and 15. I am currently the CEO of an organization called Female Strong, who works 100% with middle school and high school girls. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what that is at the end. And I've also, the past 6 years, been through some experiences that very few people have experienced. So kind of like to say I've been kicked to the curb and I've gotten back up many, many times. So excited to share my story with you. I'm going to start by just asking a few questions, 3 questions. You can just think amongst yourselves about the answers. So I'll flip to the first question. How many of you have been feeling like important parts of your life have been taken away from you during this pandemic? I know I have, I know all of us have, and we've all rallied, but there's probably some sadness in that. And so just think about that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Secondly, how many of you have felt disappointed about a grade at school, a team or club that you did not get that leadership position in, or maybe that college that you were really trying for declined you? Those are really hard, disappointing things. And so how you can come back from those is very important. Third thing, how many of you have felt unheard at home or in your community or at school? It's really hard. You're trying to get your opinion across. You want people to listen to you, and people aren't listening, and that's a difficult thing. So I'm hoping today you're going to learn some tips and tricks and hear a bit of my story to help you answer some of those questions. So here we go. First, I want to bring you back to a day in July of 2014, 6 years ago. I, at the time, still have, but my 3 daughters, Katie on the left, she, let's see, how old was she? She was 15, and my middle one, Sarah, was 12, and Caroline, the dancer, was 8. And so pretty young. So on July 13th, 2014, I got a knock on the door, and I'd just come home from a run. It was a beautiful sunny day. It was hot and sweaty. I had 2 girls at home. One of my daughters was at band camp at school. And so I peeked out the door, and what did I see? I saw a police officer, and I live in the community of LaGrange, southwest suburb of Chicago. And I frankly didn't think much of it because I have an alarm system. Sometimes it goes off. The police have come. It's really not a big deal. So this time I went outside. I have a dog. So my girls held the dog because he's a little rambunctious. Open the door, go out on the porch, and this police officer is there, and he's holding a slip of paper. And he says to me, "Your husband has been gravely injured. I'd like you to call this Chicago police officer number." And he kept handing me this piece of paper. And I said, "Okay, please tell me what happened to my husband. And he just kept repeating the same thing. He's been gravely injured. Please call this Chicago police officer number, which was extremely frustrating. But I just took the number because I knew he wasn't going to give me any additional information. I came inside and I called my two girls down and I said to them, Daddy's been injured. I don't know what happened, but I need to go call this police officer. And I had them call my mother, who was at church at the time, working at Vacation Bible School, because I knew I was going to probably need an adult here to help supervise. So they did that. And that was certainly a day in our lives that changed our family trajectory forever. There's no question. And it changed the trajectory of not only my family, but our community, their school friends, the business I was running with our employees. It changed the trajectory for a lot of people. So what did I do? I went out in the front yard. I called this Chicago police officer, and really through my head, I was thinking, well, maybe my husband got hit by a car while he was walking downtown, because he did that a lot. He'd walk to appointments. That's how he got his exercise. And so, that was my first thought that popped in my head. But then pretty quick after that, the next thought popped into my head, and the thought was, Tony shot Steve. And I don't know why my head went there, but it did. And so I called the police officer, and he shared with me, he said, your husband has been gravely injured. Again, already know this information. Can you get a ride downtown? Was his message. We need you. He's in surgery at Northwestern Hospital. We need you to get a ride downtown quickly. So of course, he kept repeating the same thing. I've been through this exercise before with the other police officers. So I hung up, called my dad, asked him for a ride. And then as soon as I hung up the phone from my dad, my cell phone rings, which is weird. And it is the news. And they shared with me that, in fact, Steve had been shot, and they asked if I had any comment. And frankly, I don't even remember what I said, but I'm sure I said I have no comment, and I hung up very quickly. But all of that happened within about 5 to 10 minutes. And so that quickly, the information spread through the news. So just to back up, my husband, Steve, started a company called AeroStream in the year 2000. And AeroStream was, and still is, a third-party logistics and supply chain technology company, working predominantly with large restaurant chains, Wendy's, Applebee's, Chick-fil-A, those sorts of chains, and large food service distributors. And 4 days prior to July 31st, 2014, he had demoted our chief technology officer, Tony. And he was nervous about that experience, frankly. He and I talked about it a lot. And he kind of worked up to, the company needed to make some changes. And so that was the change that they wanted to make. And so he demoted Tony on a Monday. And he and Tony kept talking. And he really wanted Tony to stay and be a part of the company because he still had so much to offer. We just needed another person in that leadership role to take the technology further. And 4 days later, on July 31st, Tony came to have a meeting with my husband, and he brought a gun to the office. And he shot my husband twice, once in the head and once in the abdomen, and then he shot himself. And that was a crazy day, obviously. A difficult day. There's so many emotions around that day. And so, before I'd gotten in the car with my father, I told my daughters, what I knew. I did not tell them their dad had been shot at that point. I didn't know how to tell that. How do you share that information? It's just so raw and fresh. And I don't know, those things don't happen around where we live. It certainly hadn't happened to anybody we knew. So I just said, your daddy's in surgery. I'm going to go downtown. And I left and got in the car with my dad. And soon after I left, a news truck pulled up in front of my house. And so my daughters found out pretty quickly what had happened to their father. And they, of course, as all teenagers do, hit the internet, and there it was. So very, very crazy experience. And so there were kind of two different experiences going on here from here on out. There was me in the car driving downtown with my father, and then there was what was happening in LaGrange at home with my daughters. So I get in the car with my dad. We're driving down I-55, beautiful, bright, sunny day. I'm looking at the city, and what do I see? I see news helicopters overhead, over the loop, which I knew was where our offices are. And that was just eerie. It was this strange feeling knowing they were there for Steve. And I can still, even though I'm in the car, I can't hear the rotators of the helicopter, but I could in my head. So it was kind of, it was crazy. I called a couple of my very good best friends and shared the information with them. They, of course, were shocked and stunned. And, I don't even know how you react to that information. And they, of course, dropped everything and came to be with me. And they, of course, had to share that information with their children. And so, things are just kind of escalating downwards here. And those are really difficult conversations to have. So as I'm driving with my dad, then I'm getting calls from friends in New York, friends in California, a friend in France. All of this is probably now 30 minutes from when I found out the information. So news travels so fast, which was crazy. We pull up at Northwestern Hospital. There are, of course, news trucks parked out front, waiting for the shot. And we were lucky that between when my dad pulled up, there was an ambulance that came in. So the ambulance blocked me from the news truck. Chicago police officer was right there. He ushered me right in through the emergency room at Northwestern, back into an office with the doctor, and the police officer stayed there. And they just shared with me, said, this is what happened with your husband. He's been shot. We're really concerned about his injury in his abdomen. So we want to address that right away. And so he was in surgery for that. And that's all they knew. I met a woman, a nurse liaison. I didn't even know what that was or what that title was, but her name was Liz. And basically she's your shepherder, if you will. A nurse liaison helps you and helps navigate all of these various blue tape, red tape things that one needs to go through, and they help get it done, which was super helpful. But all along in my mind, I always thought Steve is going to be okay. I mean, we'd been married 17 years, and I just knew in my heart, like, he is going to be okay. He is going to survive this. So the nurse liaison moves us away from the emergency room, takes us to this other waiting room, this maze behind the scenes at Northwestern, and go into what looks like a big conference room, if you will. It's private. And there are already people there, people I hadn't even called, friends, and my husband's analyst, people that I was close with, and some people that I wasn't as close with. But there was this, people had heard the news and they just wanted to be there for support, which was really, really nice. This is a picture of my Steve. So it's one of my favorites. He was at a baseball game, and I'm sorry, I'm not a good sports person. The San Francisco team with his dad, and so that's a picture from that. So as this is all happening, this is what's happening in the loop. They, of course, had to close down the streets. They evacuated buildings, and the Airstream offices were right on Jackson and LaSalle, so right across from the Board of Trade and the Federal Reserve Bank. And so there are so many people, thousands and thousands of employees right in that area. And so many people remember this story because they were evacuated from their offices nearby. Here's where they blocked off the street, and that's where the Airstream offices are. And again, pictures from the scene. And it's very weird as the person that this is happening to then see all of these things on the side. So here I am in the waiting room, and with my friends, Steve comes out of surgery and they now say, okay, we need to operate on his brain. So of course they had me sign some papers. They said, he's been injured in the front of his brain. So likely we're going to have to remove part of the front lobe of his brain. Are you willing to do that? And I, of course, said, well, yes, anything that you can try to do to save my husband. Signed the papers. The doctors went and did what they need to do. And I sent one request. I said, may I have his wedding ring? Because I just wanted something of his with me that I could hold and have with me as a touchstone and knowing he would be close by. So I lost track of time at that point. I hadn't even thought of calling his parents, calling his siblings that lived out of town. And I said, oh gosh, I got to call them. How do you deliver that information to two 85-year-old parents? So I called my brother-in-law in Springfield, Missouri, and explained to him what happened. And they had not heard, thankfully, on the news, because of course I'd want to be the entire Aerostream family, for all of the employees, for Tony's family. I still to this day can't imagine what they went through as well. And so just to kind of think through all of those people as well, it was really hard. So Steve survived through surgery. They took him up to an intensive care unit at Northwestern, and it was late at night at that point. It was probably 11 p.m. and I was finally able to go see him because I hadn't seen him at this point. And I went into the room, and he, of course, has he's hooked up to a respirator and variety of things. His eyes are closed and they're all glossy, and he was unconscious. And so I went and looked, and told him I loved him and held him. I couldn't really get close because he's all covered with things. And one of my very good friends stayed with me that night, and it was scary. He flatlined that night, and all of a sudden there's this team of people that run into the room, and there's like 30 doctors there all of a sudden. But he made it through that. Again, he had made it through so many steps by that time. And so that was the first and last time that would ever happen. And I started to be in survival mode, and I would be in survival mode for the next 3 years. So spent the night, woke up the next morning, not only am I managing Steve's care and that of my daughters, and I hadn't seen them again because fortunately they were with my mother and she was helping and my whole community was helping, which I felt really thankful for. But I went, oh my gosh, I'm now running a business as well. So that was another awakening. I felt very fortunate because I had been involved in the business. Aerostream was our fourth child. And, when Steve came to me in 1999, 2000 to say, I really want to go do this. Will you support me? I said, 210%. I am there. We're going to do this together. And I am absolutely on board with you living your dream. And so we started Aerostream. We ran it from our home on the third floor for a while until we moved into other Loop locations. And and I helped out early on, as one does in all entrepreneurial ventures. I did some HR, I did some sales, I did some financial things. You just pick up with whatever needs to happen. And I did. So that's me down at the hospital. Then back at home, of course, there are other things evolving. And my girls, fortunately, a couple of them had been seeing therapists, so they reached out quickly to their therapists that same day, July 31st. And one therapist came to my mother's house. My other daughter went and saw her therapist at her office. And our church held a vigil that night, a prayer vigil, and there were hundreds of people came. And again, the news was there. Everything was always under the watchful eye of the news. One of my friends in LaGrange started a campaign, a red ribbon campaign. And here we go, some red ribbons. That this one happened to be in front of our house, but people just want to do something. And Steve's favorite color was red. And so she wanted to create this visual representation of Steve everywhere. And so she and lots of people in the community started tying red ribbons. And the red ribbons ended up being everywhere, literally every single tree. And our mail carrier even tied a red ribbon on her mail truck that lasted for probably about 1.5 years or 2 years. Like, she wouldn't take it off, which was so, so sweet. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days, having not come home, talking to my girls. At that point, we talked about Daddy being shot, but, again, extremely hopeful he's going to be okay. He's, receiving the best care possible. And so I was sure of that. Then I came home after 3 days, and people had put a sign up on our front door, "Get well, Mr. LaVoie," and a red ribbon. But it was weird. My daughters weren't home when I first walked in the door, and I walked in the door, and there's just this eerie, quiet, calm, and people had dropped off flowers and little tokens and gifts for my daughters. And I just remember this huge weight that happened. And I'd felt that once before. And the time I'd felt it before was when my husband and I came home after the birth of our first child. We walk in, and you kind of look at each other and you go, whoa, our world has completely changed. What do we do now? Like, the routines we had, we're not doing those anymore. We need to come up with new routines. It felt the same like that, except that was a positive experience. And this was very different, but I just knew that my whole world had changed. My daughters came home. I saw them for the first time. We hugged. They're scared. They were terrified. Not only is their dad going to live, but their dad got shot by a person he knew at an office in the Loop. We live in LaGrange. Like, this is foreign to all of us. Unfortunately, we all see on the news shootings and things that happen. And for us, we had never experienced that directly. And now what's playing out in the news is our story. And they were scared. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and the world was no longer a safe place for them. At least that's how they felt. And that's still something that sits with them today, which is really, really challenging. The first time, so this happened on a Thursday with Steve. By Monday, not many days later, I went to the Airstream offices for the first time. And I addressed the employees because I knew that's where I needed to be. I knew I needed to reassure them that everything was going to be okay. And Steve was well loved. All the employees really enjoyed working for Airstream. They loved my husband. They loved the vision. He was extremely passionate. Everyone was behind it. And thank goodness, the team at Airstream was amazing. Right when this happened, the next day, and if you think about it, the employees at Airstream were the first responders to this scene. And I can only, it's really hard for me to imagine that, but they were. And so all of that is sitting with them as well. But we've got a business to run too. And we didn't want to lose any customers. And the news and the media said we were downsizing. So there was the wrong message out there because we were not downsizing at all. But if that message gets out, what can happen to your business could be extremely awful. Our executive team and top salespeople, they hit the phones the next day to reassure all of our customers that everything's going to be okay. And as I shared, we lost Steve. He was the CEO and the chairman. We lost our chief technology officer all of a sudden. And here I am as the interim CEO. And I know that I've still got my daughters. I've still got to manage Steve's care. I'm in a state of shock. I am not the person to run the day-to-day operations, but yet need to be extremely involved. So I ended up promoting someone from within who had a really great operations background, and he was able to step in immediately to be the CEO and take care of that. So I became the chairman, but an extremely active chairman because we had put all our money in this business. And not only us, but we had friends and family investors that had put their money in this business. We had 65 employees and all of their family. That was all relying on the company being successful. And so there was no way that I was going to let anything happen to that. And so that was key in my mind. Absolutely. So the hospital, again, I need to be working. I need to be taking care of my kids. I was downtown every day because when you're in the hospital, you want to be there first thing in the morning, like before 6 a.m. because that's when all the doctors come and that's when they tell you important information. And back to my nurse liaison, Liz, she set us up. We had a conference room right by Steve's hospital room, which was so helpful. And so my CO, who lived close by, would come every morning after I got briefed by the doctors. He and I would meet about what's going on for the day. And then I'd go into the office for a little bit. And that, that's how we managed the business for a while. And what was really weird, which another thing I never knew, some people would just show up at the hospital to see Steve. And that just made me really uncomfortable because he was in such a tenuous situation. I really didn't want just people showing up at the hospital and news people calling and asking about Steve LaVoie. So we had to quickly get an alias name for Steve, and I'd never known about aliases either. So he became known as Walter Fagan. He was a huge Steely Dan fan, and probably maybe for you all on this call, Steely Dan doesn't resonate with you, but it was a band that was certainly near and dear to his heart. So he became Walter Fagan anyway. But I'm still extremely hopeful. And I really believed that Steve likely would not go back to run Airstream again, but I thought he's going to go on the speaking circuit. I know it. And I was raised by my mother to believe that I could do anything I set my mind to. And my husband used to make fun of me for that. And he'd always come up with the example of, well, really, you're going to go on and play professional basketball? You're not built that way. And I always hated that example, but I always said, well, yeah, if I really wanted to do that, I could train to do that. I could learn how to do that. And that's just how I've been wired from the beginning. So I knew I'm going to tackle all of whatever gets thrown at me. And believe me, there's been a lot that got thrown at me over the years, but I can do it. So that really resonated with me. Steve's still unconscious. I would touch him. I'd come in and I'd kind of hold him behind his neck, and he would always kind of turn his head toward me, and I would talk to him about the girls and what's going on at the business, and he never turned his head for anyone else. So I really, truly believe he knew I was there. So the first time the girls came to visit him was on his birthday, August 17th. So a couple weeks after the shooting, they were not all that excited about going to see their dad because they didn't know what to expect, and what do you say, and what's he going to look like, and is that going to be scary? And so I thought, okay, well, they should see their dad, and they did want to see them, but I thought, well, the best time they could do it is on his birthday. So we went on his birthday, and he went to University of California, Berkeley undergrad. So I put his Cal Berkeley hat on his head, which covered up his scars, and well, they weren't really scars yet, his injuries. And he frankly looked pretty good. He still had his respirator in, but that was hard. That was hard for the girls. Then, as I was coming to the hospital every day, I would look out. This was my view, looking east from Northwestern Hospital. And this grassy area is a little different now, but the big building that's kind of in the center is the Rehabilitation Institute. And I was looking over there, which is now the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And at any rate, and it's moved across that grassy area a little bit, but I looked there and I said, if anybody can help Steve, I know somebody there can help them. So I quickly said, okay, I'm going to get him moved there. How do I do that? So I went online and I looked at, who do I know? Do I know anybody on the board? Do I know one of the doctors? And all of a sudden I'm looking, and I look online, and on the traumatic brain injury floor, the floor and the doctor specialist that Steve would need was a doctor friend from LaGrange. I didn't even know he worked there. And so I immediately reached out to his wife and texted her, and she's like, Jody, we've been wanting to reach out to you. We didn't know how or when, but Nanad can help you. And so whatever you need. And so within 3 hours, the Rehabilitation Institute team came to Northwestern to evaluate Steve. And they said they'd take on his case, which was great. So they got him stabilized at Northwestern. He was probably there a month-ish before he moved to the Rehabilitation Institute. And the Rehabilitation Institute is a place, and especially on the traumatic brain injury floor, and on that floor, there's a lot of motorcycle injuries. So any of you that want to ride motorcycles out there, please wear a helmet. Because most of the people that were there were suffering from those injuries. But they don't provide a lot of acute medical care. They're there to help stimulate the brain. So I was hoping they had some sort of new procedure or something that could stimulate some brain activity within Steve. And then a doctor from the Rehabilitation Institute looked at me once and he said, Jody, they took out almost the entire front lobe of his brain. And I looked at him and I said, can you live without the entire front lobe of your brain? And the doctor started crying. And he said, Jody, it depends on what you call living. And at that moment, my heart just sank, because the front lobe controls who you are. It's your personality. It's fine motor. It's your being. And I knew that Steve would not want to live when he couldn't be Steve. And so I had to make a really difficult decision. And I came home and I decided I had to move Steve to hospice care. And that was one of the toughest decisions I've had to make. I've recently had to make a lot of tough decisions, but that was one that was really, really hard. And I had to share with my children and Steve's family and all of our friends and family that's what we had to do. So I invited his friends, anybody that wanted to come visit him for what would be soon to be the last time. Now's the time. The girls and I went away for a couple days before we moved Steve into hospice to Michigan. A friend of ours locally had a home there and said, why don't you just go for a little retreat? That you've been, at this now. Now it had been about 2 months, almost 2.5 months. And so we took a little break, which was hard because I knew the day I got back, I would be moving Steve into hospice care. And so let's see what my next photo is. Here's a picture of Steve and me holding him, which was really hard. And so I'm going to go back. That one's too hard. So We were driving, an ambulance took Steve from the Rehabilitation Institute, and I, of course, rode in the ambulance with him, and it was different. You know, the sirens are not blaring, they're not moving fast, they're moving him from the Rehabilitation Institute, and I decided to bring him to our local hospital in LaGrange, where he would receive hospice care. I wanted him close to us. He still had some medical issues. I was not comfortable having him at home, just not knowing how to respond to all of those. So moved him to the LaGrange Hospital. We were driving in the ambulance and we drove by our house. And I was talking to him and I said, Steve, you know, we're driving by our house. And I just keep talking to him. And I had friends that were at my house and they were decorating for the fall and putting planters out. And it was just really, really, really sweet. So we went to the LaGrange Hospital and we had a lovely room where people came and visited, and we went through photos and everything. And a few days after we were there, Steve died peacefully, alone. I had stayed with him a couple nights in the hospital, and my good friend's husband had spent the night with him that night. And my friend's husband went in the bathroom at 6 a.m. to get ready for his job. And when he came out, Steve had passed away. And to me, that was how Steve would have wanted it. It was on his own terms. So that was really special. Again, on the news, here he is. Loop shooting victim dies. This would be October 13th, and it was raining that day, which I guess seemed fitting. Came home from the hospital again, super eerie. And of course, the news is again parked out front of my house. And my two best friends went and talked to the news, and they did a story because I couldn't do it. And the news, they don't go away. They stay put until, because that's their job. They have to get a story. And I remember my friends saying the rain was tears from heaven. And so anyway, difficult day. We had a celebration of life for Steve at our local club because I knew I couldn't do a funeral home thing, and that's not who he was. And so we just toasted Steve with wine. He was a huge wine drinker and collector, and so that was really nice. Here we are, the girls and I going to the funeral. And we had a friend that came and did our hair and those sorts of things. And Steve's cousin was one of the speakers at the funeral. And he asked the girls and I to stand up and turn around and look at, there were 600 to 800 people at this funeral. It was a lot. And the news, of course, was there as well. And the cousin asked us to look behind and just look at the faces of everyone who loved Steve. And that experience, I had that experience once before, and it was at our wedding. The minister at our wedding asked us to do the same thing. Look back and look at all the people that love and support you. So that was a difficult moment again. That night, my friend and her husband and many had this cadre of people that took down all the red ribbons around town, because it was just a difficult reminder for me. And the funeral and his death was kind of the end. And I just wanted what could be. It wasn't a fresh start, but I didn't want the constant reminder of walking outside of my house and seeing the red ribbons. It was just too hard. And I took off my wedding ring that night, which was really difficult. And so here I am running the business. The business at the time, frankly, we had lost 3 major customers that year, unrelated at all to these events, which is also why, and our technology was stale. And that's why we needed to make changes. And so we had a hard road to haul right there. I'm a woman, as you can see, in a technology supply chain business, which is predominantly male. The executive team was completely male. I had an advisory board that Steve had established, and I wanted to retool the advisory board to make sure that I had the right support team around me to help me run the business and make the best decisions I could. I added 2 people to the advisory board who helped immensely. One was an attorney that I knew personally, and the second was a gentleman who worked for a venture capital firm who was also a friend. He would go turn around businesses, and he was in between gigs. And so he was really able to act hands-on and help me, which I needed. I, at that point, had really been out of the workforce for 8 years, home raising our children. I didn't have a LinkedIn. I didn't have a resume. I didn't have an established professional network. I'd put that together ASAP. I hired somebody to help me put together a resume. I actually put together my LinkedIn, and I asked her to do a resume, and she's like, Jody, you have the job. You don't need a resume, which was true. So we didn't do a resume, but I needed a bio, and I needed a LinkedIn. I needed to connect to people. And so she helped me do all of that. I knew that I was not going to become an industry expert on supply chain or a food service, and I didn't need to, because my team was amazing. The Aerostream team, I love them. Again, they were a 4th child. So I knew they had that, but I needed to be the strategist. I needed to help with direction. I needed to make sure we had the right players doing the right things at the right time. I needed to make sure we got the financing we needed. And so how did I do that? Was I continued to surround myself with experts in the field. I joined a couple organizations. I joined YPO, which is called, it stands for Young Presidents Organization. Steve had always known about this group. It's an amazing group, and I know you all out there as extremely successful high schoolers will one day start your own businesses and be able to join YPO as well. You have to have businesses of a certain size, have a certain title. So it's all people running businesses, basically. And they have a group called Forum. And those forums are small groups of 8 to 10 people, all business owners that get together, and you share your business issues, your personal issues, your professional issues. And my group was amazing. Again, I was the only woman in our chapter for YPO. Only 7% of the members are women. Not surprising, because there, as we know, within, all of you have heard, certainly, we need more women at the top. So, but extremely helpful organization. I also joined an organization called NABO, National Association of Women Business Owners, because I wanted to get my woman business leader fix, if you will. And actually a connection I made through NABO, which it led to my current role that I have today. So I was leading Aerostream as chairman for about 2.5 years. We turned the company around and regained our profitability. The goal was always to sell the business at some point, because going back, remember, we had friends and family investors. They all wanted an out. That was certainly always the goal. We'd been running the business then for 17 years, but it had to be the right time. And so one of the big jobs I did while I was there was I had to go through the sale process. I hadn't done that before. So certainly, got feedback from my network, but I knew I needed to hire a banker and get a good attorney. And I was super thankful. I have a very good friend that I went to undergraduate with who worked for a major law firm, international law firm, who was willing to take us on as their client for a rate that was consistent with what we could pay. And so I was extremely thankful for that. So used all the connections I have. Here's our logo, Aerostream. And so for a year, went through the sale process. And, my girls soon would know, like anytime I was on the phone with the banker, Michael, I'd be on the phone for a long time because he was quite a chatter. So after the year, was able to sell the business, sold to a private equity firm who owns it today. It's still obviously in business. They moved, and moving was always part of the plan because we had more square footage than we needed, but I think they only moved kitty corner from where we were. So they're certainly right down in the loop as well. But I'd been doing and running Airstream for 2.5 years and taking care of my daughters. And there obviously were a lot of emotional things that needed to be taken care of there, and trying to find a little bit of time for myself, which was very hard. And so I took a moment to just breathe. I'd sold the business. I wanted to figure out what I wanted to do next, because I certainly wasn't done, contributing to this world. But I knew I needed a little bit of time for myself. So I took a personal retreat. I took a trip. I hired an executive coach to help me. I'm the kind of person, I always like to start from the beginning. And so how do you start from the beginning when your slate is wiped clean and you could do anything? So she really helped me think through the process of what is it that I want to do next. And that was really helpful. I knew that I wanted to be able to give back in some way and share what I'd learned. I knew I wanted to do something with girls and women, because I, as a professional chairman of a pretty large business, realized the lack of women in leadership, and I wanted to help change that. I saw the struggles my daughters had gone through, and so all of my stars really aligned, because it went back to my NABO connection. I had a really good friend from NABO who was one of the co-founders of the nonprofit that I'm running today. And it's called Female Strong. And Female Strong is all about building confidence in middle school and high school girls. There we are, our logo, so that they could become future leaders. And so we do that through a number of different programs, one of which, our flagship program, which has been around now going on 7 years, is the Young Entrepreneurs Academy of Chicago. It's an organization and a curriculum that we license from a larger national organization. But we've had a class of approximately 15 to 20 girls that have gone through it. And it was really important for us to focus on girls, because when girls are in their 7 or 8, 84% of them believe that they can do the same job, same math problems, same everything as the boys sitting next to them. But by the time they're in their teens, later teens, that number drops to 32%, which is a precipitous drop. And so we are all about how can we stop that drop in confidence in our younger girls. So Young Entrepreneurs Academy, I mean, the skills you learn in the program, our girls build businesses all the way from idea generation to putting together business plans, to working with mentors, to how do you do an elevator pitch? How do you stand in front of a group of adults and convey your message? We bring in outside speakers to help them. We have mentors that work with them one-on-one for a period of time. And here's our YA class from our last YA class. And then in the end, they pitch to a group, an investor panel group. And they have the opportunity to get funded. And last year we funded about $10,000 for startup funding for the girls that pitched. So, not insignificant amount of money. And I think you will see here, JEC folks, one of your own, Rachel Patterson, who put together a business called Avid Minds, which is a job shadow internship platform. So she was part of our YA program. But I know there are young men here on the call as well. And it's important for all of us, men, women, girls, boys, all of us, to be there to support each other, to help advance each other, and especially in these unprecedented times that we have today. So I want to talk to you about some takeaways that you can have from my talk today. And the first one is, and all of these, of course, relate back to all the skills that I learned throughout my time over the past 6 years. But the first one and most important one is grit. And many of you have probably heard of Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. If you haven't, I highly recommend you reading it. If not, take a listen to her TED Talk. It's 6 minutes. But what she talks about, and this is really at the essence of who I am, is perseverance. It's really not about how smart you are, what your IQ is, where you grew up. It is, how can you get knocked down and come back up again, and get knocked down again and still come back up again? Because this journey we're on is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And she studied, she was a business person who quit the business world and then went on back to school and became a psychologist and did a lot of studying on this. And, it was funny, on her TED Talk at the end, she said, okay, I don't have a conclusion of this is what you need to do to have grit. We're still working on that. But what is important is the perseverance and being able to fall down and get back up. So grit, super important. Secondly, surround yourself with the right tribe of friends. And I say that for you all as high schoolers, it's just so important. You need a team. You need the right team that backs you, that has your back, that is always there for you. And so if you don't, I encourage you to maybe take some of the people that you are looking to change friendships with and find your team, because that's what you need along the way to have your back to help you. Find your adult champion. That's really important. Whether that be a teacher, of course, your parents are always there to support you, but I also encourage you to find an outside mentor. Maybe it's a business person in your community. Maybe it's someone at your church. Maybe it's your neighbor. Maybe it's an uncle. Maybe it's an aunt. But go out there and find your adult champion who's also going to help you along the way as well. Are you taking care of yourself mentally? So important. And it's easy to forget about. And we all hear a lot about, okay, we all need to journal, and we all need to meditate, and we all need to just breathe, which was my constant reminder. That's why I have it framed downstairs at my home. Just breathe. You need to take care of yourself mentally. It's so important. Otherwise you can't think clearly. If your mental space isn't in order, it affects you physically, it affects your friendship, it affects everything. So if you're feeling like you need some additional support in that area, I encourage you to seek that out. Your schools have that, your churches have that, and obviously through medical professionals, they can certainly get you connected to that as well. Take care of yourself physically. You don't have to go out there and join a team at school. You just have to do what that means for you, whether that means to go take a walk, whether that means to row a boat, whatever that means for you. But you need to be doing something physical for yourself every day, because of course that helps your mental state as well. And finally, be comfortable asking for help. All of those things I did. I had grit. I surrounded myself with the right team. I asked for help when I needed it. I had mental support, that's for sure. I gotta say, I'm still working on the physical piece of it, but I certainly get in exercise at least 3 to 4 times a week, but I'm still working on that part. We all still have to work on some pieces. So just breathe, ask for help, learn continuously. That's another item, another important thing. You're not done learning when you finish high school, when you finish college. We're always learning in everything we do. That first job that you get outside of college is probably a stepping stone to the next job. And you may have 3 or 4 different careers in your whole lifetime, and that's okay. And that's pretty cool, actually, because you've learned and expanded your horizons in a bunch of different ways. Put your own oxygen mask on first, which again is take care of yourself. That is just so important. And you're the creator of your own destiny. So go out there and do amazing things. And I know you will. And I'm going to follow you all on social media to keep an eye and see what you're doing, because I look forward to hearing great things about what you're up to. Here's how you can find more information about Female Strong and our Young Entrepreneurs Academy. In addition to our Young Entrepreneurs Academy, for middle schoolers, we are having an idea camp this summer, the end of July. It will be virtual, and it's going to be a fun, hands-on experience. We've teamed up with the Paper Source and Facebook to, the Paper Source is actually going to mail very cool kits to people's houses so they can get ideas percolating and generating, and we're going to be bringing in a variety of outside resources and do virtual tours of different businesses, and the whole premise, and sorry guys, it's for girls. That one's for middle school girls, and all of our programs are for girls. So anyway, would love for you to join us. Check us out on your website. We have book groups that are going on. Our next book group starts on Tuesday, and we'll be studying Hidden Figures. And then for our girls that have gone through our Young Entrepreneurs Academy, we have a Business Blast program that we are launching so they can continue to build their businesses. So lots of cool things that we do. Would love to have you join us. And I think Cole's going to put the contact information in the chat. And also, for those of you that are on the YouTube Live, don't forget about the Junior Economic Club of Chicago. Find them. These are really cool young adults doing amazing things, learning amazing things, and you'll want to be a part of that as well. So it's time to move on to Q&A. I'm going to stop my sharing, and happy to take any questions.
Hi.
And wow, sorry, it's 3:02. Sorry, I went over 2 minutes. I got carried away. I just got talking. Sorry, everybody.
First off, I want to say that was such a beautiful presentation. It was very inspiring. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that was amazing. I can start it off, I guess, with the questions. And
yeah.
Everybody in the Zoom right now, feel free. You can just raise your hand, and I'll answer that, and then you can just ask your question. So I was wondering, did you have any trouble getting to know the employees and transitioning into your position while you were taking over? And do you have any tips for maintaining that confidence while you're facing that kind of like adversity?
Yeah, very good question, Cole. So fortunately, I knew many of the employees because I was involved, and not only, so I was out of the direct Aerostream involvement for 8 years. However, as it was our 4th baby, we talked about everything Aerostream every night. And Steve would ask for my guidance and ask for, well, what would you do? And there were moments where he said, I think you should be doing this job, and I'm going to come take care of the kids for a while. So I knew who a lot of the employees were, fortunately. I knew some of our customers. I knew the direction of the business. So that part was really helpful. What I needed, and to answer the second part of your question, Cole, about confidence, is having those outside support groups, the NABOs of the world, the YPOs of the world, the JECs of the world. Joining extra other groups helps, because you also can say, okay, I think this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? So you get some extra support there. And friends, surround yourself with people that are going to give you the love and the positivity and the messages that you want to hear, and also, give you the, okay, I think you're doing the wrong thing here too. Being willing and able to tell you when they have tough news to share too. Thanks for asking, Cole. Anyone else? I could have been just really thorough.
Okay. Alp has a question, so.
Hello.
Oh, hey, Al.
So my question was just like as a high schooler, it's oftentimes like you're always trying to meet deadlines and there's always some kind of stress around. So how are you able to find like moments of positivity around so much stress and negativity?
You know what I've had to do, Alp, and that's a really good question, because you're right. You have tons of things thrown at you. Not only schoolwork, you've got friend issues, and it doesn't stop, because of course we all have cell phones, and it keeps coming. I actually put on my calendar. I put time for, and it's on my calendar, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. I do personal reflection. I read a little, I'm reading a poetry devotional kind of thing. It's by Rumi, which just gets my brain going. I am doing also some journaling, which I've always wanted to do. And I set my timer, because I set a timer for like 3 minutes and call it a day, and write stream of consciousness kind of thoughts. And I also signed up for this journaling prompt that's much more creative writing, which just gives my mind some space away from thinking about high school, thinking about friends, thinking about sports, thinking about college, thinking about the essays you got to write. It's a lot. You all have a lot that you're taking on. So schedule it. put a little reminder beeper on your phone to alarm you to say, uh-oh, okay. And if you have an Apple Watch, I think they even say that, like, get up and walk around, it'll beep at you or something.
Thank you so much.
Of course, Al.
I had another question also about representation in industries. So I was just wondering, like, how big of a role do you think representation plays in like the business world or entrepreneurship?
Okay, so can you clarify what you mean by representation a little bit more?
Like across different subsections of like people's identity, like race or gender or things like that.
Yeah, very good, extremely relevant conversation. And obviously, and unfortunately, it's been playing into things. It's been playing into promotability. So, I mean, there's gender issues that have come into play for women, for others that identify as others. That's been it's been a struggle, and in fact, in this pandemic, you'll see women have been more greatly affected than men, because now you've got kids that have to stay at home, and the woman usually stays at home then to take care of the kids, and they've given up their jobs. Race has come into play as well, and I think we are all recognizing, and I hope so, that the conversation is continuing and needs to continue for a long time, because we all need to have the same opportunities, everyone. And it hasn't been fair, and it hasn't been equitable, and that's not right. And that's what we're all here to change.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you everybody for having me. This was really fun. And you still have time to go outside and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time, Miss Jody LaVoie. We appreciate it so much, and we appreciate this presentation. We hope to connect with you in the future.
Great. I'd love it. I'd love it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you so much, Ms. LaVoie.
You're welcome. Bye.